You said earlier that culture is extremely important when it comes to pronatalism and then the script that people are operating under. So Elon Musk is saying that if there is 30 years of stable civilization, we should be able to get a city in Mars of 1 million people.
Terminus, right?
Well, yeah, I think it should be called Musco.
But I think he calls it Terminus. I think he already named it.
There should be something a little open-ended. Do you think?
It feels dead end, right?
We're calling it pronatalism initiative in part because pronatalism has taken Michael was saying earlier, has gripped the imagination of Silicon Valley. But when it comes to culture, there's this competing idea that pronatalism should take. So I think I read this week that Elon Musk is building a compound in Texas for his the various mothers of his children to be able to move in, so that they're sort of like close to him. Okay. So that seems to be, that's pronatalism of some sort. I mean, it might be going back to an earlier
it's a version of
culture, but is that sort of like polygamous, polyamorous culture? That's one. If that's one option, is the pronatalism initiative perhaps suggesting another? Yeah. Does it have to be trad wife culture and 6 families and a homestead? And perhaps one way of answering this question is, well, let's just have a blank slate. We're going to Mars. We're going to put 1 million people on there.
What culture prevails in the Mars colony?
What pronatalist culture should be on there? Should it be a 20th century American nuclear family one? Should it be something archaic and polyamorous to sort of like make sure? Should it be a bunch of IVF babies raised in the facility? Why does how we raise our children matter in a pronatalist context?
I will say polygamy is not the future. And the reason why is because it's not the past. People have this notion that humans moved out of an era of polygamy into the civilizing light of monogamy. That is not what happened. We know this because, again, we can look in ancient DNA and we can count how many actively reproductively successful Y chromosomes appear and how many mitochondrial lines appear. And we can see that in the primordial ancestral state for humans, we were pair-bonded breeders. That is, the ratio of mitochondrial lines to Y lines, so men to women, is comparatively balanced. It is not until essentially a bit before, basically the end of the last ice age, but before agriculture, you start to see the rise of what looks to be polygamy. And then particularly with the advance of a series of war-making technologies in the Bronze Age, you get this epic expansion where like the number of reproductively successful female lines is like 25 times the number of successful Y DNA lines, which implies the massive polygamy. And you see this, you get like kings of Babylon who report like 250 wives and 5,000 children or something. But the point is, this was like a very brief episode of the human story that emerged because of a bizarre kind of military situation, and we're not going back to, because it's maladaptive. It didn't produce like wildly good things. The civilizations that stuck with it lost. Basically, the Romans ate them for lunch. And the Romans, of course, were aggressively monogamous. So the reason I think we're not going to be polygamous in the future is because we are quite literally biologically pair bonders. We optimally sort into long-term, not always lifelong, but long-term marital unions. It is true that polygamy has existed in the majority of documented historic human societies, but there's almost no society in all of human history where a majority of unions were polygamous. So it's just not going to be the future. The future is going to be some version of monogamy. It's going to be some version of loving parents raising their biological children. There will always be exception cases. There will be things on the margin, but that's how most people are going to live and raise their kids. And that's where most of future human genetic material is going to come from. And so that being the case, it is really, it might not be identical to mid-20th century American nuclear families. It may vary in certain ways. The historic norm was that men and women both worked full-time as subsistence farmers. I don't know, our work arrangements may vary. But the future is absolutely not going to be, polyamorous scientists, having, full genetic mix in a test tube, and that. No, it's just not going to happen. And then also people wonder about artificial wombs, and I'm skeptical on them, both on the scientific technology side, but also the reality is the main cost of kids is, and I say this without any disrespect to the very real work that mothers do gestating children, but overwhelmingly the dominant social and resource cost of reproduction is raising the child. Mm-hmm. And so even in the case where adoption is highly subsidized, you don't see people, very many people, adopting massive numbers of children. A few families do, for mostly religious reasons. So it just, raising the kids is what costs a lot. So you're not going to get a situation where everybody's like, well, I'm just going to have them grow in an artificial womb and raise 47 children. No, you're not.